The cantina on Nexus Prime reeked of sulfur and desperation. The air was thick with smoke from a dozen different alien species, each nursing their own poison of choice. In the darkest corner, away from the flickering neon lights, sat Vextar. The massive Corvani warrior looked like a living nightmare, 8 feet tall with chitinous armor that had turned black from countless battles. Deep scars crisscrossed his hide like a roadmap of pain, and his forearms moved with the careful precision of someone who had survived when others hadn't. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, reflected the amber glow of his drink. The liquid inside bubbled and hissed, giving off vapors that would kill most oxygen-breathing species. But Vextar barely noticed. He was lost in memories that played behind those alien eyes like a horror movie on repeat. The cantina door burst, open with a bang that made half the patrons reach for their weapons. A group of young alien recruits stumbled in, their voices loud and obnoxious, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having faced real danger. They wore the pristine uniforms of the Galactic Coalition, their armor still shining, their weapons still factory fresh. "Did you see the deployment orders?" one of them shouted, a young Corvani with barely formed chitin plates. "We're being sent to the outer rim, human space." Another recruit, this one a reptilian saurian with bright green scales, slammed his fist on the bar. "Finally, a chance to show those soft-skinned humans what real warriors look like," I heard. "They cry when they get hurt," laughed a third, a spider-like arachnid, whose multiple eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Their pathetic little bodies won't last 5 minutes against Corvani steel." The cantina grew quieter. Conversations died down as the older patrons, veterans who had seen real combat, turned to look at the young fools. Some shook their heads, sadly. Others simply went back to their drinks, knowing that youth never listened to wisdom. But Vextar's mandibles clicked once. The sound was sharp and precise, like breaking bones. In the sudden silence that followed, it might as well have been a gunshot. "I think humans are weak because they bleed easily," he growled, his voice carrying across the now quiet cantina like distant thunder. Every word was measured, controlled, but underneath was something that made the bartender's tentacles curl. In fear, the young recruits turned toward the voice, squinting into the shadows. What they saw made them step back instinctively. Vextar rose slowly from his seat, his massive frame unfolding like some ancient machine of war. The scars on his body seemed to pulse in the dim light, each one telling a story of violence and survival. "Sit down, younglings," he commanded, his voice never rising above a whisper but somehow filling the entire room. "Let me tell you about the Third Terran War." The recruits exchanged glances. The smart ones looked nervous now, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. They shuffled over to his table, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Vextar's scarred face reflected the dim light as he settled back into his chair. The metal groaned under his weight. He studied each young face before him, seeing his own past stupidity reflected in their eager eyes. 23 years ago, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who had told this story before. "I was just like you, young, strong, convinced that the universe owed me glory. I thought the same thing you do now, that humans were just another weak species to be conquered." He paused to take a long drink from his glass. The liquid burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire of his memories. "I was part of the 7th Assault Legion, elite Corvani shock troops. We had conquered 14 worlds in 5 years. Our armor was impenetrable, our weapons unstoppable, our tactics flawless. When Command told us we were being deployed against human colonies, we laughed, literally laughed." One of the recruits, the young Corvani with the bright chitin, leaned forward. "What happened to make you change your mind?" Vextar's compound eyes fixed on him with the intensity of a predator. "Our first target was a human settlement on Kepler 442b. Intelligence said it was just farmers and merchants, maybe 3,000 civilians total. No military installations, no defense grids, no orbital platforms, just soft pink creatures growing food and trading goods." He set down his glass with a clink that seemed to echo in the silence. "Command called it a training exercise. Said, we could practice urban warfare on a defenseless target, before moving on to the real military objectives. Easy prey, they said. A quick victory to boost morale before the real fighting began, the Saurian recruits snorted. Sounds like it should have been a massacre. Vextar's mandibles clicked again, but this time it sounded different, sadder, more tired. It was a massacre, young one. Just not the kind we expected. He reached across the table with one of his scarred arms, his clawed hand stopping just inches from the recruit's throat. The young alien went very still. That was before I learned the most important lesson of my life. Humans don't just fight to win, younglings. They fight to survive. And there's a difference between those two things that will haunt your dreams. Until the day you die. The cantina held its breath. Even the bartender had stopped polishing glasses to listen. You see, when most species fight, they fight for territory, for resources, for honor. But humans... Vextar's voice dropped to barely, above a whisper. Humans fight for each other, and when you threaten what they love, they don't just become warriors. They become something else entirely. Something that makes warriors like us wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The jungle world of Kepler 442b seemed perfect for our assault. Vextar's voice dropped to a whisper that made the cantina's air seem to thicken around them. The planet was a green hell of dense canopy and suffocating humidity. Trees stretched up 300 feet, their branches weaving together so tight that sunlight barely touched the ground. The air was soup-thick and filled with spores that made most alien species choke and wheeze. Our dropships screamed through, the atmosphere like falling stars. Vextar continued, absently tracing a particularly nasty scar that ran diagonally across his chest. The mark was deep, obviously from something that had tried to tear his heart out. 50 elite Corvani shock, troops in full battle armor, each of us worth 100 ordinary soldiers. Our weapons could punch through starship hulls, our armor could stop plasma cannon fire. He paused to take another drink, and the young recruits noticed his hand shook slightly as he lifted the glass. We dropped right into the middle of what intelligence called New Busan. 3,000 human settlers, they said. Farmers, merchants, a few mechanics. No military training, no heavy weapons, no orbital defenses. Just soft pink creatures trying to grow crops in alien soil. The Saurian recruit shifted impatiently. So what went wrong? Did they have hidden weapons, secret bunkers? Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. Oh, younglings, if only it had been that simple. No, they had something. Far worse than weapons or bunkers. They had home field advantage and 3 billion years of evolution that had turned them into the galaxy's perfect predators. The massive warrior gestured to the scar on his chest again. This came from the first human I ever met face to face. His name was Dae-Ho Kim. Intelligence files said he was just a farmer who grew something called rice in the settlement's agricultural sector. 32 years old, no military service, no combat training. Just a man trying to feed his family. Vextar's compound eyes seemed to lose focus as he stared into the past. We hit the settlement at dawn, expecting to find sleepy civilians stumbling out of their beds. Instead, we found empty buildings and silent streets. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. That should have been our first warning. Most species panic when you attack them. They run in random directions, making noise, leaving tracks. But the humans of New Busan had vanished into their jungle like they were never there at all. The young arachnid recruit leaned forward, multiple eyes gleaming. So you hunted them down? We tried, Vextar said grimly. For 3 days, we combed every inch of that jungle. Our thermal scanners couldn't penetrate the canopy. Our motion detectors kept triggering on falling leaves and small animals. Our communication systems were jammed by some kind of natural electromagnetic interference from the planet's core. He took another drink, longer this time. But Dae-Ho? This simple farmer moved through that green hell like it was his own backyard. He knew every tree, every root, every shadow. More than that, he knew how to use them. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the background hum of conversations had died away, as patrons strained to hear every word. On the first day, we lost 3 soldiers. Not killed, just gone. They were there one moment, reporting in over comms, and then nothing. We'd find their gear scattered around trees, their weapons disassembled and left in neat piles. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Vextar's voice grew strained. The second day it got worse. Dayho started playing games with us. He'd leave messages carved into tree bark, written in perfect Corvani script. Things like, "Turn back now," and "This is your only warning." How did a simple farmer learn to write in our language? When did he have time to study our culture? The young Corvani recruit swallowed hard. What kind of messages? Personal ones, Vextar replied, his voice barely audible. He knew our names, our ranks, our home colonies. He left a message for me that mentioned my clutch sister back on Corvan Prime, knew that she worked in the crystal mines on level 7, information that wasn't in any military database. By the third day we were down to 37 soldiers. The jungle had swallowed 13 of the galaxy's most elite warriors without a trace. Our commander was talking about calling for orbital bombardment, just burning the entire continent to ash and declaring victory. Vextar's clawed hand clenched around his glass. That's when we finally cornered him. We'd been tracking heat signatures and broken vegetation for hours, following what we thought was his trail. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing beside a crystal-clear stream. The warrior's voice took on an almost dreamy quality, as if he was seeing it all again. Dayho was sitting on a fallen log beside the water, completely relaxed. He had his rifle, just a simple human projectile weapon, disassembled in his lap, cleaning each piece with careful precision. When he heard us crashing through the undergrowth, he looked up and smiled. 50 armed warriors in full battle armor, surrounding one human in simple work clothes. He should have been terrified, should have begged for mercy or tried to run. Instead, he smiled like he was greeting old friends. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's dim lights like fractured mirrors. He looked directly at me and said in perfect Corvani, "You've been very patient, Vextar of the 7th Legion. I hope the hunt has been educational." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the story they'd expected to hear. Then, he did something that froze our blood in our veins. He whistled. Just a simple melodic tune that echoed through the jungle canopy. And the jungle whistled back. Vextar's voice cracked slightly. That's when we learned the most terrifying truth about humans. They don't hunt alone. Ever. Even when there's only one of them visible, there are always more. Always watching. Always coordinating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The whistling came from everywhere at once. Above us, beside us, behind us. We were surrounded by an entire network of humans who had been tracking our every move for 3 days. Dayho wasn't. The prey, he was the bait. And we had walked right into their trap. The ambush came from everywhere at once. Vextar's voice grew strained as he relived that moment of chaos. 1 second we were standing in a peaceful clearing. The next second the entire jungle exploded into violence. But it wasn't random violence. It was precision chaos choreographed. Like a deadly dance. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a twisted burn mark that covered most of his forearm. The flesh had healed badly, leaving ridged scars that looked like melted metal. This beauty came courtesy of what used to be a simple irrigation sprinkler. Humans named Seungmin Park and Heejin Lee had spent their evenings after farming, turning their entire agricultural system into a weapon of war. The young recruit stared at the burn mark in fascination and horror. It was clearly not from any standard weapon they recognized. Seungmin was a mechanical engineer before he became a farmer. Spent 15 years designing mining equipment on some corporate world before he got tired of city life and moved to the colonies. When we invaded his new home, he took every piece of farming machinery and turned it into an instrument of death. Vextar gestured broadly with his scarred arm. Those massive combine harvesters that were supposed to cut grain, Seungmin welded armor plating to them and mounted rotating blade assemblies on the front. Imagine a mobile fortress the size of a building, covered in spinning death, churning through the jungle and cutting down everything in its path. The Saurian recruit's scales rippled with nervous energy. "But surely your armor could withstand agricultural equipment." "That's what we thought too," Vextar replied grimly, "until we learned about Heejin. She was a chemistry teacher at the local school before the war started. Taught human children about molecular bonds and chemical reactions. Sweet little woman who spent her free time growing flowers and teaching kids to make soap." He touched the burn mark again, wincing slightly. "Within hours of studying our fallen soldiers, Hyojin had figured out exactly how Corvani carapaces were structured. She knew our armor was made of calcium silicate compounds reinforced with organic polymers. Most species would need months of laboratory analysis to understand that. Yijin did it in her kitchen, using a microscope she borrowed from the school. The cantina's atmosphere seemed to grow heavier as Vextar continued. She mixed up a batch of custom ammunition, using fertilizer, cleaning supplies, and some kind of plant extract from the local jungle. When Xiongmin's modified irrigation system sprayed it on us, our armor didn't just get damaged, it dissolved, like ice cubes in hot water. The worst part was watching our technology get turned against us in real time. Every piece of equipment. We lost every weapon we dropped, every vehicle we abandoned. The humans swarmed over it like insects. But not to destroy it, to understand it. Vexitar's compound eyes reflected the cantina lights as he stared into the distance. There was this human child. Tae-young Kim couldn't have been more than 12 solar cycles old. Skinny little thing, with big curious eyes and hands that were always dirty from taking things apart. The young arachnid recruit clicked its mandibles skeptically. A child? What could a human child possibly do against trained soldiers? Everything, Vextar said simply. While we were busy trying to fight the adults, little Tae-young was in his family's basement, surrounded by salvaged electronics from our crashed dropships. He had circuit boards spread across his bedroom floor like puzzle pieces, figuring out how our communication systems worked. The veteran warrior's voice took on an almost admiring tone. Using nothing but determination and what humans call trial and error, this 12-year-old child reverse-engineered military-grade Corvani technology. By the end of the first week, he was listening to every conversation between our commanders. By the second week, he was feeding false information into our tactical networks. I remember the exact moment we realized what had happened. Our unit was positioned for what should have been a perfect ambush on a human supply convoy. We'd been tracking their movements for days, had complete intelligence on their route and timing. When the convoy appeared exactly where it was supposed to be, we opened fire. Vextar paused to drain his glass completely. The convoy was empty, just automated vehicles carrying nothing but scrap metal and decoy heat signatures. While we were wasting ammunition on targets that didn't exist, the real human forces were hitting our supply depot 20 kilometers away. They knew exactly where it was, exactly how many guards it had, exactly when the shift change happened. That's when our commander called for an emergency communication check. Every unit reported in normally, but something felt wrong. The responses were too perfect, too precise. When we ran a deep analysis on the comm traffic, we found digital fingerprints that shouldn't have been there. The recruits leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story now. Little Tae-young hadn't just been listening to our conversations, he'd been participating in them. For over a week, a human child had been impersonating Corvani field commanders, giving orders to our troops, redirecting our movements, feeding us false intelligence, and he'd done it so perfectly that none of our officers suspected anything. Vextar's voice cracked, with something that might have been respect or terror. But the real nightmare was watching them improve our own technology. I saw Xiongmin take apart one of our pulse rifles with nothing but his bare hands and a farmy. The Battle of New Busan's agricultural district lasted 3 days, but it felt like 3 lifetimes. Vextar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the cantina to lean forward just to catch his words. That's where I learned the most terrifying truth about humans. They're not individuals fighting separate battles. They're cells in a vast organism, all connected by invisible threads of communication and shared purpose. He reached up and traced a deep gash that ran across his skull from his left eye to the base of his neck. The scar was old, but still angry-looking, as if the wound had never properly healed. This particular gift came courtesy of a human named Kyung-soo Park. Intelligence files said he was just a mechanic who fixed farming equipment and transport vehicles. Quiet guy who spent his days covered in grease, making sure the colony's machinery kept running. Vextar's compound eyes glittered with remembered pain. But when Kyung-soo fought, he moved like he had eyes in the back of his head. No, that's not right. He moved like he could see through every other human's eyes simultaneously. While I was focused on him, He somehow knew exactly where my backup was positioned, where my escape routes were blocked, where my weak points were exposed. The veteran warrior paused to signal the bartender for another drink. His hands, the recruits noticed, were shaking slightly now. It took me almost getting killed to understand what was happening. Every human on that battlefield was connected, through some kind of communication network that went beyond anything we'd ever encountered. They weren't using radio or digital signals, those we could have jammed or intercepted. This was something else entirely. The cantina had grown completely silent now, with patrons from other tables abandoning their own conversations to listen. Even the usual background noise of clinking glasses and alien chatter had died away. I watched my unit commander, Thexnor, the Unbreakable, get taken down by a group of humans who shouldn't have been able to scratch his armor, let alone kill him. Thexnor had survived the siege of Proxima, the Battle of the Crimson Nebula, and the genocide wars of the Outer Rim. He was a legend among our people, a warrior whose name was whispered with respect across a dozen star systems. Vextar's voice grew heavy with grief and disbelief. The humans who killed him weren't soldiers. There was Yunbi Song, a kindergarten teacher, who spent her days helping 5-year-olds learn to read. During the battle, she used her knowledge of child psychology to predict exactly how Thexnor would react to different tactical situations. She knew that warriors like him had been trained to respond in specific ways to specific threats, and she manipulated those responses like she was playing a game. Then there was Jin Wu Li, who ran the colony's main restaurant. Before the war, his biggest worry was whether his kimchi was fermented properly. But when the shooting started, he turned his understanding of cooking chemistry into explosive expertise. He could mix household chemicals into bombs that were more effective than our military-grade demolitions. The young recruits exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the glorious battle story they'd expected to hear. And Sujin Kim, the colony's head nurse, she'd spent 15 years taking care of sick colonists, treating everything from broken bones to alien fevers. When we invaded her home, she used that medical knowledge to become the most efficient killer I've ever seen. She knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage to Kovani physiology, exactly which pressure points would cause our nervous systems to shut down. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound like castanets in the silence. Among his species, it was a sign of extreme distress, the equivalent of a human's nervous laughter. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. These weren't 3 separate fighters using their individual skills. They fought like they shared a single mind. When Yunbi identified a weakness in Thexnor's defensive pattern, Jinwu somehow knew instantly and positioned his explosives to exploit that exact weakness. When Sujin spotted the perfect moment to strike, Yunbi was already moving to create the opening she needed. It was like watching a dance choreographed by death itself, every movement coordinated, every action building on the previous one, every decision made with perfect knowledge of what the others were doing. The veteran warrior took a long drink from his freshly arrived glass, using the pause to collect his thoughts. During the second day of fighting, I watched something that defied everything I thought I knew about warfare. A human fighter named Minho got caught in crossfire and died instantly. He was just a maintenance worker, but he'd been coordinating the defense of the eastern perimeter. Any other species would have faltered when they lost their coordinator. Communication would have broken down, units would have gotten confused, the defense would have collapsed. But the humans? The second Minho fell, every other human in that sector somehow knew everything he had known. His tactical insights, his knowledge of our positions, his understanding of our battle plans, it all transferred instantly to the surviving fighters. Vextar's voice took on an almost mystical quality. It was like watching a computer network reroute around damaged nodes. When one human died, the others didn't just continue the fight, they became better at it. They absorbed everything that Fallen Warrior had learned, every observation he'd made, every strategy he'd developed. By the third day, we realized we weren't fighting a group of individual humans anymore. We were fighting against a collective intelligence that grew stronger with every casualty, smarter with every engagement, more dangerous with every passing hour. Death didn't weaken them the way it should have, it made them evolve. Ni Tool. He studied it for maybe 20 minutes, figuring out how the energy chambers worked, how the targeting system interfaced with the trigger mechanism. Then he rebuilt it. But not the same way. Better. His version had twice the power output, half the energy consumption, and a targeting system that could track multiple enemies simultaneously. He'd taken our weapon and made it superior using human ingenuity and scrap metal from his workshop. That's when I understood the truth about humans. They don't just fight you, they absorb you. Every technology you show them becomes theirs. Every tactic you use becomes part of their playbook. Every advantage you think you have becomes their advantage, but improved and enhanced beyond recognition. The wow. Humans weren't just defending their colony. They were studying us, learning from us, becoming better versions of us with every passing day. The Third Terran War ended 6 months later, but not the way anyone expected. Vextar finished his drink in one long gulp, the alien alcohol burning down his throat like liquid fire. The entire Corvani Armada, 300 ships, 50,000 of the galaxy's most elite warriors, didn't conquer humanity. We ran from them like scared children fleeing from monsters in the dark. He stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding like some ancient war machine coming to life. At his full height, he towered over the young recruits, casting long shadows across their table. The scars covering his body seemed to pulse in the dim cantina light, each one a testament to battles that had broken lesser warriors. The final battle wasn't even on a planet. It was at New Sol Station, humanity's primary orbital facility, above Kepler 442b. Just a simple space station where they processed agricultural exports and maintained their small fleet of transport ships. Nothing special, nothing threatening. At least that's what our intelligence said. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the neon lights as he remembered that last, terrible engagement. Admiral Crixvor decided to end the war with one decisive strike. We'd take their orbital station, cut off their supply lines and force a surrender. Simple, clean, effective. The kind of strategy that had worked against dozens of other species. The young Corvani recruit shifted nervously. What went wrong? Everything, Vextar replied grimly. Our assault ships breached New Sol stations, hull in 12 different locations. Perfectly coordinated textbook boarding operation. We expected to fight through corridors filled with panicked civilians and maybe a few security guards with hand weapons. He paused, his mandibles clicking in that nervous rhythm that had become familiar to the recruits. Instead, we found humans named Jae-hoon Park and Mi-young Kim waiting for us, not hiding, not running, not begging for mercy. Waiting, like they'd sent us invitations to their own funeral. Jae-hoon was the station's chief engineer, spent his days maintaining life support systems and fixing broken air recyclers. Mi-young ran the agricultural processing center. Her biggest concern was keeping the grain silos at proper temperature. Neither of them had any military training, any combat experience, any reason to be dangerous. Vextar's voice took on that same quality of awed terror that had marked his entire story. But when our boarding parties stormed onto their station, these two civilians led a defensive action that military historians still study today. They didn't just fight us, they dissected us, analyzed us, learned from us in real time. The cantina's other patrons had given up all pretense of their own conversations now. Every alien in the place was listening to the veterans' words with the kind of attention usually reserved for religious sermons or death sentences. The boarding action lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of the most intense close-quarters combat I've ever experienced. And during those 18 hours, something impossible happened. Jae-hoon and Mi-young didn't just defend their station. They took it apart and put it back together again while we were fighting inside it. Every corridor we secured, they rerouted. Every defensive position we established, they undermined with modified maintenance systems. Every tactical advantage we gained, they neutralized using infrastructure. They understood better than we understood our own weapons. Vextar's scarred face showed something that might have been respect or terror, or perhaps both mixed together in equal measure. But the real nightmare began when they stopped defending and started learning. They didn't come to destroy our equipment or kill our soldiers. They came to understand how everything worked. I watched Jae-hoon drag a wounded Corvani warrior, into what used to be a storage closet. I thought he was taking the soldier prisoner, maybe trying to get information through interrogation. Instead, he was performing field surgery, keeping our warrior alive while he studied Corvani anatomy, physiology and biology. The young recruits looked sick now, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Within hours, Jae-hoon knew more about how our species functioned than most Corvani doctors. He understood our weaknesses, our pressure points, our nervous system responses, and he shared that knowledge instantly with every other human on the station. Mi-young was doing the same thing with our technology. She took apart our pulse rifles, our communication systems, our armor plating, not to destroy them, but to understand the principles behind them. Every piece of Corvani engineering became a textbook for human innovation. Vextar moved toward the cantina's exit, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The war ended when they reverse-engineered our quantum drive systems. Our most advanced technology, the foundation of our entire spacefaring civilization, understood and improved by humans in less than 3 days. The last transmission from the war zone was a human named Dong-hyun Lee, just a maintenance worker who had been responsible for cleaning the station's waste recycling systems. But somehow this janitor was explaining to human engineers across the galaxy how to build starships that were faster, more efficient and more powerful than anything the Corvani had ever created. The recruits sat in stunned silence, their world of certainties crumbling around them like sandcastles in a storm. You want to know why humans are whispered about in the darkest corners of the galaxy? It's not because they're the strongest warriors, or the fastest ships or the biggest guns. It's because they turn every defeat into a lesson, every death into knowledge, every war into an opportunity to evolve into something better than they were before. Vextar paused at the cantina door, his massive frame silhouetted against the neon-lit street beyond. Those colonists on Kepler 442b, they're still there, still farming their crops, still raising their children, still living their quiet lives, but now they have Corvani technology, Corvani tactics, and Corvani weapons, all improved by human ingenuity and human determination. And every day they get a little bit better, a little bit smarter, a little bit more dangerous. The young recruits exchanged nervous glances, but their pride and youth wouldn't let them show the fear that was clearly written on their faces. The young Corvani stood up, puffing out his chest in a display of false bravado. "We're not afraid of humans," he declared, his voice cracking slightly. "We'll show them what real warriors can do. Our generation is stronger, smarter, better equipped than yours ever was." The other recruits nodded agreement, standing and adjusting their pristine uniforms and unused weapons. They swaggered toward the exit, their voices rising with renewed confidence as they headed for their transport to the human frontier. Vextar watched them go, his scarred face impassive. Then he turned back to the bar and ordered another drink, settling into his chair like a mountain finding its resting place. The bartender, a tentacled creature from the Spiral Arm colonies, approached cautiously. "Think they'll listen to your warning, old warrior?" Vextar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's dim light one last time. His mandibles clicked once softly, like a sigh made of broken bones. "No," he said simply. "But the humans will learn from them anyway. They always do. In 6 months, if any of those younglings survive long enough to make it back to this cantina, they'll understand why humans have become the species that turned warfare into an art form, and why the galaxy's greatest warriors now fear the sound of human laughter." He raised his glass in a toast to the empty air. "To the humans of New Busan, who taught an old soldier that there are fates worse than death, there's irrelevance." Outside, the transport engines roared to life, carrying another generation of alien warriors toward their appointment with humanity's infinite capacity for adaptation and growth, the end.